Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Peter Brune, and I am I guess you could say, curator for the online exhibition Grace. I'm an artist, I'm a curator, and I love doing things like this. This is the second and final event in conjunction with the Grace exhibition, which is an online exhibition on my website, the first of a series of online exhibitions to take place in the coming months and years. And I want to, first of all, before we get started, thank some folks. I want to thank the 6 artists, besides myself, who participate in the Grace exhibition, along with the 3 guests that we have today. There's Daniel Anastasio, Felicia G, and Alexi Santos. And I also want to thank Megan McCarthy, who's a website designer who was really a true collaborator in making that exhibition what it is. And Kathy Odell, who is in this event, hello Kathy, who wrote a beautiful introduction to the section of the exhibition with my work. And finally, I want to acknowledge and thank Nancy Patz, who sponsored the online exhibition. So thank you all for making it possible. It is definitely not a one-person effort. So for this event, what's going to happen is I'll have a brief orientation on Zoom for those of you who might be relatively new to it and how you can participate. And then I'll introduce the 3 artists who are taking part today, one at a time, and I will spotlight them. And depending on what setting you have on your Zoom screen, they'll either pop up as central or, I'm not sure, it all depends on the settings that you have, but I will bring them in one at a time. We will then spend a few minutes on each of the artists and focus on some aspect of their work in relationship to the exhibition. And then in the second half of the program, we will basically have a conversation with all of you. And we should be done by about 8 o'clock if all goes according to plan. And I'm just really glad you all can be here. It's such a wonderful mix of people. Some I know, some I don't know. So first timers, welcome, and old friends, welcome too. So before I introduce the artists, a couple of housekeeping things. First, please remain muted during the program. The only time you would ever not mute yourself is if during the conversation I bring you into the conversation, in which case you'll of course want to unmute and then mute yourself again after your part in the conversation. Anytime during the event, you can jump into the chat box, and depending on your screen, at the bottom, there's a menu bar and there is a chat box feature. And Nicole has already written, "Thanks, Peter," and you're welcome, Nicole. And what I'm doing right now is, if I'm successful, I am dropping in some information on how you can learn more, see the Grace exhibition and learn more about the 3 artists who are featured in today's conversation. So anytime at all, feel free to pop into the chat box and say something, and I will do my best to monitor the chat box with half an eye. And I will say to my guest artists, if you see something in the chat box that catches your eye that I'm missing, by all means, at the appropriate time, bring it into the conversation. You also can direct message people in the chat box, in the box where it says "to." It's either to everyone, or you can send a personal message to any single person who's in on this event. The other way I will want to invite your participation is there is another icon down at the bottom of the Zoom screen called Reactions. And if you want to say something, you want to flag my attention, you can click the raise hand icon. I have just raised my hand, and then hopefully I will see that and eventually call on you like a good school teacher. And so that's how you all can participate as this unfolds. Okay, so without further ado, let me bring the artists into this conversation. So the first person I'm going to spotlight is a playwright, somebody I met 7 years ago, and it's really fitting to me that Alonzo is in this exhibition in light of the circumstances of when I first met Alonzo 7 years ago. I will never forget having coffee with him in a place in Baltimore, and we were each talking about our adult children who had died and how art helped us through that. And that has really stuck with me and has something to do with my thinking of Alonzo as a participant in this exhibition. He is a nationally known and acclaimed playwright, and it's a real honor to have you here. Alonzo, I'm now going to spotlight you. There you are. And make sure you're, okay, good, you're unmuted. Hi there.
Hi, how you doing, Peter?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for being here.
It's always a privilege working with you, Peter.
Thank you. Okay, so the next artist I'm going to bring in, I have known for, my gosh, over 40 years. And Hermine Ford was a regular visiting artist when I was in graduate school, and really has been a mentor and a role model, both as an artist and a human being, for just about my entire life. She divides her time between New York and Nova Scotia, and today she's joining us from Nova Scotia. And amazingly, Hermine and I also had the very same high school art teacher, though decades apart from each other. Hermine, welcome.
Nice to be with you all.
Thank you. Okay, and finally, last and certainly not least, Circe Dunnell, I met just a few years ago. She's an artist and an educator in New Jersey, and we really hit it off right away. And what I really like about Circe is she's intelligent, she's generous, and best of all, she's no nonsense. So all those three qualities made it really special when she visited my studio a couple years ago and saw work that nobody else had seen and spent time with it and had tremendously positive things to say that have really encouraged me. So it's a real honor to also have Circe in this conversation. So Circe, welcome.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for including me, and thank you everybody for coming.
Yes, yes. Okay, so we are going to get started. I'm going to start with you, Alonzo. You created a piece especially for this exhibition. And when I invited you, I wasn't necessarily thinking that. I was thinking you had something you could pull off the shelf that was really germane to the topic. And you certainly do, but you elected to create something for this project. Can you talk about what motivated that?
Well, I think when you said the idea was grace, and I immediately thought, oh my goodness, what a timely topic, because I felt like everyone was kind of experiencing that on some level these days, especially in the last year, year and a half, however long it's been. And I just thought it was a natural progression. And when you say grace to people and you're kind of describing it, I think it feels like people just nod their head and go, yes, yes, yes. Like they've either had some experience with it or they know what you're talking about. And I love the idea. And I think the more mature we get, or as we mature, we become more aware of the part of grace that's around us, that's in our lives. And it doesn't always, for the piece, it doesn't always, it's not big and bold and dramatic. It comes in random little bits and pieces. And then we're kind of caught at, oh, well, that was a beautiful moment. Well, what was that, And it just touches us inside. It just gets in there. And we're usually surprised, we're usually completely unaware, and we have this reaction that feels like, oh, I went for a walk today and it was spectacular. And people kind of know what you feel, that it's elements, it's nature, it's where you are at the moment. So I love the concept of being brought into the process. And no, I wasn't going to pick something off the shelf for you, Peter. What do you think I am? What kind of hack do you think I am? So I got my wheels moving, and I'll just wrap up real quick. It started with, I had a conversation with someone I met on a bicycle trail named Susan Tillinger. And I met her on a ferry. She was getting off the ferry. And we just started talking. And the more she was talking, the more she revealed was, this is a woman who'd been diagnosed with cancer multiple times. She'd had about 16 surgeries at the time I met her. But she was just so, yeah, that happened and that happened. And now I'm, I mean, she was so past it. It did not define her at all. And we stayed in touch over the years. And I kind of started writing, I asked her, could I kind of write a story about you and about your life? And that's what first came to mind, because she was someone that seemed to exemplify not letting life and difficulties and circumstances and everything else, whether it was health, and she was a mother of two, living very modestly, but you would have thought she was the queen of wherever, because she was just, you know, out and about on a beautiful day, and had learned to take the small little things, and they were just, well, this is all I need. I just need sunshine, and I have a bicycle, and I can ride with my kids, and what's better than that? What's better than that? And that's kind of how it started for me.
Yeah. And you divide it into two sections, really, where there's one narrator's voice and then your own speaking directly to Grace. And before I invite you to share an excerpt from the piece, I want to just touch on the kind of logistics of your participation in an online exhibition with a written piece, and what your solution was to that challenge.
Well, you know, I didn't want just something to be, I didn't just want to read something. I wanted some visuals, I wanted some images that I thought would highlight it, illuminate things. And they didn't have to be connected. I didn't necessarily want them connected. So one is more a story from Susan. The other is my own voice of what I was feeling. And I know the time I talked to you, it was like, well, Peter, I think I want to, and you nailed it right off and said, sounds like you need a video editor. I said, yes, that's what I need. That's what I need. And after that happened, it was like, oh, this, you know, of course, people do this all the time. But it was a great challenge to be able to kind of merge the two into a statement.
Yeah. Well, you have the actual written material, which is the piece, and I wonder if you'd share an excerpt.
Sure, absolutely. Grace, how do we find it? What passage is there for discovery? Grace is a slow motion merry-go-round for tragedy, sorrow, success, failure, and love. We can be on that ride or stand by and watch the ponies do their circle dance. Either way, we receive all life has to offer, either in first person or third. When I find myself in motion, it makes everything seem like a roadside attraction. I'm moving, and at that moment, how lucky am I? Grace surprises us with humbleness, shields old torments, disposes bad voodoo, replaces negative mischief with a shiny new soul, blinks with new eyes, allows hearts and minds that, that bow to no one, to raise up for everyone. On second thought, how lucky are we all? That's my little excerpt.
I love that, Alonzo. There's so much juice in there. I want to invite Circe and Hermine in at this point and ask if you guys have any responses or questions for Alonzo before we move on to the next artist. I know I have some thoughts, but I want to start with you. And to the audience, you'll have your chance. You'll have your chance. And feel free to comment in the chat box. And certainly when we have opened this up to wider communication. But for now, Circe, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I'm always interested in process, Alonzo. So I think I gathered that this is the first time you've worked with images with your text. Am I correct in that?
I've made short little videos that I've used in plays, but nothing like this.
So what did it feel like? How did that process unfold? Were you working tightly with the editor, or did you just say, ooh?
So I had an idea of, okay, I think I want this kind of image and this kind of image. But it didn't have to match at all with what I was reading. And because again, I think the randomness of it is what excited me about it. I tried to not write something that was too trite or too kitschy or something like that. So I tried to make it original, even though I know there have been a zillion words about something like grace and something like gratitude and things like that, but people much better than me. But I said, well, this is going to be my input. This is my 2 cents. So more so to answer your question, I had to trust that what I was writing was as genuine as I could get it. So I was aiming for that more than anything.
And then allowing the video editor to create impressionistic images to go with it is the sense I got. Yeah,
absolutely. And
Yeah.
I had a great editor, and she got it right away and said, well, we can use this and this. And then she had the timing down, the way people do who work with movies and film, and they have all that. And as it started to take shape, I was happy about it. I was happy to see it come together. And having a theme. I mean, who during the course of your lifetime asks you to do something, about grace? We have commissions, or we're asked to do this or that or whatever, but someone comes along like Peter and says, I want to talk about grace. It's huge. It can be overwhelming. And
Absolutely.
so that's where I was with it.
I love your line about experiencing it in first and third person. That really speaks to the gift of grace in some ways. Hermine, do you want to comment before we move on?
I do have, I could make a lot of comments, but one thing that really jumped out, Alonzo, from what you said, is you mentioned the word trust. I forget exactly what the parameters of it, but you, at a point in the making of the piece, you entered into a feeling of trust in what you were doing, it when what you wanted to do. And I think from my experience that comes very close to a feeling of grace, that experience of trusting oneself and trusting where you are and trusting what your thoughts are and your feelings and how you're going to make it. in the world, put it into the world. So I think you were actually talking at using the word grace differently, somewhat differently, but that's what I found interesting about what you had to say.
Yeah.
Well, I tried to make it, I felt like because of the topic, I felt like as opposed to a play where audience walks in, you're all in different places. People are, their minds are here and there, and they're not thinking about how this play could bring us together or anything like that. Where with this, I felt like I would be entering an arena of people who got the concept of grace and already kind of knew that, there was a certain magnificence with it that could be collective or individual.
It's great. That's a very good way of.
Alonzo, thank you very much. Respecting time, we could talk to you forever here, but respecting time, I want to go on to Hermine. And Hermine, when I first invited you into the show, we had an interesting conversation to me. You seemed at first, a little hesitant, and part of your hesitance was what I understand you took to be a kind of religious connotation to the word grace. And I'm just wondering if we could start with that and talk about both that hesitance and how you've sort of wrapped your head around being a part of this.
Yeah, I really didn't know it wasn't that I had a problem with that word or objected to it or any concept that any one of us could attach to it. I think I was curious about where you were coming from with it. And as it turned out, you were very, very wide open. Then we did have that conversation, and it wasn't a particularly, and it's not that it wasn't religious, but it also was, it was neither here, it wasn't any religious or not religious. It was kind of not about that at all.
Yeah.
And so that kind of freed me to think about it. And as I said to you, it's not a word that that particular word that would come naturally to me, that's in my own everyday vocabulary when I talk about anything much. But as I thought about it, I realized that of course I understand the concept of it, and I had experience of my own that I could relate to it, which I think, and which I described in the little statement that I gave you about and my experience of what I would be willing to call grace is in the very act of working, of making the work. That's how and one would hope that one could take that with us throughout the day, that integration where you're fully integrated, when you're concentrating on your work. And of course, as we all know, some days are harder to do that than others as we walk through our lives. But we do always have our work to come back to, and that is a space of grace for me.
Yeah. I don't know how many artists or people who define themselves as artists are listening in, but I imagine if you are, you understand what Hermine's referencing. I sure do, as somebody who gets into the studio. What we ended up doing with your participation in the show is having a series of images of your work illustrate your artist statement from your website, actually.
Oh,
which is a beautiful statement to my mind, which speaks to grace, even if that's not a word you might apply to it. And so I think what I'd like to do before we take a deep dive on one of the pieces, which you're going to talk about, I thought I would just do a quick flyby on the part of your section of the exhibition. And hopefully I will not have a technical fail as I try to share the screen. Okay, so I'm hoping you can all see this. And Hermine, are you seeing the slideshow?
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm seeing the first image.
Yeah, and your statement begins I'm not going to do the whole statement. I'm just going to do the first couple
Okay.
slides and bring you to the image. All we are, all we see is nature. Things grow or are made, maybe a human being, maybe a bird or a bee. We make objects of all sizes, buildings, art. Then they get old, sometimes are torn down, even made to disappear by water, wind, volcanoes, earthquakes, tornadoes, floods, or fire. And you go on to talk about the return of this form and the recycling of these forms. And that seems to be a really vital aspect of your work for a long time.
Very
And
long.
yeah. So what I'd like to do now is I'm going to stop sharing the slideshow and shift over to this one particular piece and have you talk about it a little bit, about what's going on with it. So there you go. I think you should see it right here. Have I got it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So this piece, I don't have the date right in front of me, but it's not a very recent piece, Peter. I think it goes back to do you have the date
2009.
there?
2009.
2009. So that's a long time ago. But there's been a very consistent thread through my work, not for a very, very long time, not on purpose, because I believe that that's the only way an artist can progress and proceed, but it just has turned out that way, that I have an overall abiding interest in something that's lasted a very long time. And this piece, there are two fragments that are stuck together. In this case, they're stuck together by me, but they could be found like that somewhere in a site, on an ancient site. And the top, I spent a lot of time in Rome right after 9/11, and it was striking. And to be in Rome, a city that had fallen down on itself so many times and been rebuilt from its own rubble right after 9/11, I had been in Rome before, but I had never experienced it in that way. And that really has influenced my work ever since. Although I took along in things previous from previous work, I took along with me into it. And that's kind of typical of the way I work. I never seem to completely abandon an idea or an interest. I kind of sweep it along and reabsorb it. But the top fragment, so to speak, actually comes from a very specific object that is on the ground in Ostia Antica, which is the old port city of Rome, and it's an archaeological site now, and it's open to the public, and you can just wander around in it, and there's incredible stuff to look there, and that's left over from a floor of a building, this tile floor, and it's I mean, I just assumed it was some kind of a sundial or a sundial. Yeah. And so yeah, what more can I say about this?
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, please.
What's it mean to you? Because these paintings, I mean, this is a large painting. It's like 6 feet by 4 feet in height and width. And it takes no doubt hours. The construction of the support itself is a huge deal. And so what is the meaning that drives you to realize this? And this, and like, what is the aha? What is the realization? What is the affirmation that comes from this resurrection of broken materials?
I think it is resurrection. I think it's just that, what you just said, that it's possible to be resurrected. And once again, I am not conventionally a religious person, but I think to echo what Alonzo kind of hinted at in the beginning of his talk, we have been, and in my lifetime, I mean, I mentioned 9/11 already. We have and are experiencing very, very traumatic times and very traumatic changes. And this idea that the materials that this original Roman mosaic were made from are natural. They come from the earth. They're pigments from shellfish, the pink from a shellfish that they've ground up and made pigments, clay, the tufa volcano rock that they made all their buildings with and everything. It's in nature. It's in nature. And it becomes, and humans, but the way animals make things, animals make their own shells, they make nests, they make all kinds of things for themselves, hives, and humans seem to have this need that I can make something with this, I can honor it, and I can resurrect it in some way and take it forward and take it along with me.
Yeah, that's lovely. I'm gonna go back to our conversation. I'm gonna stop sharing the image, but I am going to stick with it to the extent that I want to ask Circe and Alonzo if there's anything you'd like to weigh in on what you just heard or saw. Oh, you unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, Alonzo.
I didn't unmute myself when I was talking to you, Peter, but
That's because you never muted yourself, which is great.
oh, I'm sorry.
No, totally cool.
Rookie mistake on my part. Rookie
Yep.
mistake. Rookies do mistake. So, Hermine, I was, as much as you talk about religion, and you said it's kind of like a resurrection in your art. And don't you have a quote? It's not a quote, but you were talking about the act of working as like a prayer.
Yes. Yes. No, yes. I mean, yes to everything. All of those. I know it's funny. I mean, and also let me say something too. When I say I'm not a religious person, that I don't practice a conventional religion, that by no means means that I'm anti-religion or that I am not interested in it or respectful of it. And I have people that I love that are close to me in my lives that do a whole lot of different religious practices. And so it's not, anyway, so that's what it is. And I certainly have the kind of moments that you describe in your piece, Alonzo, that thankfulness that you expressed, that is often also some people experience that in their religious practices. I don't label it that way, but it's the same thing,
Yeah. Circe, do you want to jump in?
I do. I was really particularly drawn to what you said about, I think, idea of reabsorption, that history never, I forget exactly what you said, but what I saw in your work were these historical fragments coming back, and
Yes.
history is always coming back, and it's this
Yes.
constant cycling and constant
Yes.
cycling, and seeing your fragments. And I guess I wasn't paying attention when I was looking on the website. I didn't get the scale, but
Oh, yeah.
thinking of them on that scale is just enormous.
Hmm.
how do you even get there?
May I comment before you answer that, Hermine? Circe, to see, and everybody on this Zoom event, to see Hermine's work in person is a transcendental experience because of the gifts of all those brushstrokes. Each one is a, how did she do that? Where did that come from? They're just symphonies. They're gorgeous. Hermine, you're on. Go ahead. Answer Circe's question.
Well, I'm blushing. Seriously, the support could not be more primitive. I make them myself. I'm not a carpenter. I cut the support out. I put linen or cotton muslin down on a big panel that's, and then it's miraculously, it goes down smooth, it dries. I make a lot of little tiny drawings, and then I make a big pattern, a life-size pattern on butcher paper, and I trace it out and I cut it out, and that's the support. And I spend more time than I want to making those things. But then once I have it made, if you ever have a chance to see them in person, you'll see they're not fussy, they're not pristine. And I make myself, the mosaic part, I make myself do them as quickly as I can, because I don't want it to be, I mean, what I've responded to in the real world is really old. Those little tiles are really old, and they're broken, they're chipped, they're discolored, some are missing. And then sometimes very funny, there's a humor to it in the churches in Rome. Sometimes you'll see this very elaborate pattern, and it'll be red, red, green, red, green, red, green. Then all of a sudden there'll be 5 reds in a row.
Yep.
Okay, we ran out of green that day, so it's a kind of human imperfection. It's a kind of last minute, oh my God, gotta think on my feet here. So anyway, thank you.
Well, I'll be looking for a studio invite when you're next in New York.
Let me know when you're in New York. I'll welcome you.
So, yeah, and Hermine, you touch on that issue of trust as well. It's interesting. You picked that out with Alonzo, and you just described trusting the process in many ways, just giving yourself over to it, which is what a lot of writing about grace speaks to.
Well, that's what
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I tried to describe to you, in that conversation, or
Yeah.
in my statement. Yeah.
Just allowing it. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Circe, I'm going to turn to you, and hopefully we'll have a good 10-15 minutes for other folks to chime in after we've talked a bit about your piece. You define grace a little bit differently, or rather you approach it a little bit differently, rather than something that comes to us as something we can bestow upon others. And I wonder if you care to talk about that before we I share my screen and we move into your section of the exhibition.
Well, I think when you first approached me, Peter, I was really overwhelmed. And so I had to start thinking about, well, what does grace mean to me? And what is grace? And is there grace in my life? Do I embody grace? Who is grace? So I went through this whole cycle, if you will, and I began to realize that I think that grace can be a much larger entity, and too often, or not too often, but for me anyway, too often I'm thinking about, well, what's happening to me, and why is this, and what is that, and instead of looking out and looking at, well, how can I impact this to make it better? Mm-hmm. And I think that outlook, by and large, comes from teaching, wanting to construct a space where my students feel safe and we get back to safety again, safe to create. So I that was the thinking.
Yeah. Okay. So
That's what you were asking.
let's go on over again. Let's see if we don't have a technical fail. I'm going to share the exhibition again, and you should be seeing the cover page for your work. And after this, there's a brief introduction that I write, and then we get into your work. And each one of these, and I'm just going to fly through. Each one of these is really drawing attention to a really social issue or experiences of people that might be different than the audience that is looking at this art. And it's about mindfulness and attention. And I'm wondering if you'd like to dwell on one of these and talk about what you were after with the piece.
So let's go to the spaces in between, because that,
This one here?
yeah. So I call these curtains, and I had been making curtains and just playing around with textures and colors in the studio, and in my other part of my brain, I had been tackling some real social justice issues, both personally and at work. And I was presented with these, disclaimer, these are not my photographs. They are my very accomplished brother's photographs. And he gave me the ability, the rights to use his, rework his images in this fashion. And this hospital closed down, I think, 10 or 15 years ago. It's nearby in New Jersey, and it was completely abandoned. It is now a condo area, but people were housed there and discarded, and that really bothered me. And as I was working through this on the one side of my brain, and then I'd come back to my studio and I started to see these images, not only as these messages of social justice, but as a way to present an issue to somebody who might not necessarily care about it, in a way that perhaps might promote some curiosity, a way in, working with just the formal elements of making art, thinking about color and texture and space and all of that sort of thing. And that evolved into a greater series. The Duncan projects, which is one of the ones we flashed by, was a very early encaustic that came before the curtains. But I think the curtains is where I really cemented this idea of, yeah, I need to get these ideas out. They can't just stay inside.
One of the things that's interesting to me about this piece, speaking of what you can do to treat others with grace, you're focusing on a population that you described as discarded, as set aside, as living in these really bad conditions, and you create this incredibly dignified and aesthetically, I mean, just the formalism of it, beautiful piece, which elevates and shifts our perception of it helps us to reframe and even see a population that otherwise we would not see and bestow grace upon. And I'm wondering if I've kind of gotten what you're after a little bit in creating this work of art, to allow that prism of visibility and grace.
I think so. And what I would hope is, well, there's this piece with these negative spaces in there, that there might be the leap that, oh, well, maybe that person on the street experience something completely horrifying and that's why they're there, or whatever the reason, and see them as a human being. Um,
Yeah.
It's, we don't do well with our various populations here in the US.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'm going to stop sharing this image and go back to the conversation and invite Alonzo and Hermine, if you'd like to weigh in before we bring everyone else in, which I'm about to do. So get ready with your questions and comments. Have your cursor hover over the raised hand, and we will get to you soon. We've got a few minutes left. But Hermine and or Alonzo, do you guys want to comment or ask a question?
Well, first, let me say, Hermine, I really loved your paintings. I just kept going back and forth through them. And you're like a time traveler. You're kind of
That's true.
and circe, when I first read the part about, oh, this was all mental asylum, and long ago when I was in my early 20s and I worked at one that's now closed in Baltimore, and you nailed it. It is imagining all the cries or pleas for help or whatever that went unanswered, that it's like they were never there. And it's heartbreaking. It was really heartbreaking. So I love the descriptions and also the art too.
I have something I'd like to ask you, Circe. And I hope I can ask this in a way that is clear. As a person who clearly and profoundly feels a social injustice, referring to you, I'm talking about you, which is very strongly expressed in your work, do you feel that, I can ask myself the same question, do you feel that anything further is necessary beyond making art in terms of how we behave as citizens in the world?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because there's something, I don't want to use the word insufficient about all of us as artists. You know, we never really know what kind of an impact we have on those
Right.
things.
Right. And that is, I think, something I certainly worry about. How far does one go? And do I need to tell people what's going on over there? Even though that's separate from my art, but it's still a part of my art because it's part of me.
Yes.
If that makes any sense.
There is an interesting play, I think, between seeing something in the world and going into the studio or in your keyboard, whatever it might be, and going inward with it and creating something that maybe metaphorically or symbolically does something or addresses something, but actually is not an action. And yet when you put that object out into the world, you don't know what ripples in the pond that pebble is generating. And so it also is an act of trust and faith that out of the gesture of putting this thing we've created into the world, grace may follow.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Exactly.
Beautifully said, Peter.
I was feeling the energy of all the art and the writing that you guys have talked about, because that's what it does. That's why it matters. That's why it means something. And that's how it delivers grace to us, the practitioners, and it offers opportunities at best, if we're lucky, fingers crossed, for others. And it, you know, where would we be without it, you know?
Yeah, no, that's to imagine our lives in the world without it is a good way of learning to cherish what in the end, what we do, what we have.
Yeah. So I'd like to, you've been an attentive audience and not very chatty one. So I'm curious if those of you on the line would like to weigh in with your own, it could be a question about something you've heard. It could be a question just to one of the artists or to Alonzo, the writer, because you have this opportunity to ask this question or make a comment, or maybe share your own experiences or reflections or work around grace, what your angle on it is, what your perception of it is. This is your chance to have the floor for a minute. So I'd like to pause for a second and see if anyone out there is going to want to join in. The fact that you're all still here tells me that you're interested. So I'm not going to take silence to mean anything but that. But maybe I'll toss it back for a minute. I mean, you know, we need not go on for very long. But let me toss it back to Alonzo, Hermine, and Circe and see if you guys have any reflections that you'd like to.
I have a question, a technical question, Peter.
Yeah.
The chat room has 7 comments. Is that a way that we could start a conversation from?
Yes, well, there are some comments. So here's one. Thank you. I will go to Katie. It's Katie Singer, who writes, performing grace in looking at humanity. Yes. I think that was a reference to Circe's approach as a kind of performance of grace. Simply by making this art, there's a modeling of graceful living. And then Abby wrote, Peter, listening to everyone now, the thought just came to me how fragments can bring me or us to grace. That would be in reference to your part of the program, Hermine. Thank you for this. This is wonderful. And that idea of fragments relates to what you wrote, Alonzo, as well, about the incidentals, you know, being able to ride a bike, seeing this, seeing that. Your language was beautiful. I think both those comments speak to that. Sanzi has her hands up. Okay, I missed that. Let me go to you. Hold on, let me find you. In fact, why don't you go ahead and take yourself off mute.
I'm off mute.
Yay. And I'll look for you and try to spotlight you. Forgive me for not finding
Don't do that because everyone will see how red my face is, but
okay, I won't. Go ahead.
No, through all of this, I am curious about, and maybe someone has a thought on it or not, but I find that, you know, my experience of grace, of course, came through a profound and deep loss. And I was young enough when that did happen. And I'm curious in the sociological aspect about whether it's also a developmental stage of sorts that one must go through. Like, I was in my early 40s when I had this profound loss, but I have to wonder how much different it would have been and whether or not I could have even been attuned toward that state of grace had I been 20 years younger, for example, right? And I think that being open to that has made a big, huge shift. And I've also felt that, again, from a sociological point of view, that it isn't just about what we might make or what we might do or create to try to work our way through it, but also how we relate to anyone else who does come across our path who has not had the experience. Because when you come across those who haven't, there's these sort of, what is that word? There's trite phrases that come out of people's mouths, and then I lose my grace.
Thank you for sharing. And yeah, you and I had an exchange not so long ago, and so I do understand how your loss played such a profound role in the gift of your studio work. And I think, speaking for myself, out of profound loss through grace have come great gifts that I never would have anticipated. And only by, I think, opening myself to grace would I be able to perceive what followed in the wake of profound loss as a gift. And I don't know if age, I don't know what age has to do with it, or attitude or openness to the abyss. I'm wondering what others think on that.
Are we all, oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
I think loss makes grace more accessible, maybe, but I don't think it's required. I think it's a mindset and an awareness and an openness. I don't think.
I'm sorry, is this Beth speaking?
Yes.
Okay, Beth McFarland is
Yes.
speaking. Yeah, so go ahead, sorry.
And I don't think it has any, I don't think age is an issue. I don't think it plays into it. As far as the artwork, all three of you were incredibly interesting to hear, and it was a true pleasure. Alonzo, I had to write down, I believe it was your line about magnificent mischief. I love that. I love that. And after that was something about a new soul. That just like lit me up. It was so beautiful.
Thank you.
And you had said about that you never abandon an idea, you sweep it along. And of course you don't, because look at your work. Like that's what your work is all about, not abandoning. Like you're pulling all these things from historical places and from the dirt. So I'm not surprised that you don't abandon an idea. I thought that was really fascinating when you said it. It just made me laugh. And then Circe, I loved how you spoke about curiosity and a way in, and you referred to your pieces as curtains, which to me just made the perfect way in. Like it opened up a space for me behind the work. Like if I just went in and followed it, I would get somewhere. And I could almost picture them hanging on that building, on that hospital. So I just thought that was really great. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but so many things are not, and then they are there because they're in you. So it was just all very interesting. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. That was a nice, well-rounded comment. Any responses to that from one of you three?
I think Beth highlighted one of the things that really struck me about Hermine's work with that sweeping along. That's an image, and in that motion, in that image, I could totally climb into Alonzo's words. The ponies are still in my head.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, it was for everyone. I'm just so amazed at different roads that each of you took, and hearing about. I love hearing about the process. I love hearing about, I can see a work of art, but I'm curious about the artists and what they did, probably more so than the work. And hearing the processes that you guys each bring, it's like a portal to another dimension. Even though you've been around long enough, you hear other artists talk about their work, but this feels so particular, especially how it translates to your work. And I just had a great appreciation in looking over what you both brought to the process. It was, it was grace. It was great.
Thank you, Alonzo. I think, Peter, it was wonderful how you brought us together and to have this
I agree.
conversation.
I agree.
Yeah,
Thank you for that.
thank you. And I want to close by observing, this is picking up on a comment in the chat, which I am not recalling who said it. It's somewhere a little further up than what I'm looking at. Yeah, here it is, Katie Singer. I think grace can happen in our lives and we can be graceful or gracious to others. Two sort of different things, in my opinion. And what that brings to mind, I completely agree with that. And the real joy of working on the exhibition, Grace, is I entered into it with my own and some general ideas of what it means. But really, in creating the exhibition and inviting all of you and the other three artists, it was really about asking the question about how do we understand grace, and how do we understand grace's relationship to art? How do we understand its relationship to our lives? And what we got were a lot of different portals, a lot of different answers, a lot of different lenses through which to think of grace and appreciate it. And I think that that's, for me, what's been the leitmotif of this conversation is the multitude of ways grace hovers for us in our studio and in our lives. And so it's been really wonderful. And the comments from the folks who chimed in were really helpful in that perceiving that multiplicity of meanings and takes. So I just want to thank you all. I want to thank the audience and Alonzo, Hermine, and Circe.
So nice to meet you three. Peter, as he said, I've known, but the two of you. So nice to meet you, the two of you.
Yes, absolutely. I feel the same. Now I'm going to look for you.
Same here, Alonzo. And
Okay.
same for you, Circe.
All right.
I'll be looking for you both.
So I am putting into, whoops, I'm not putting into the chat room. I thought about putting, if you go to the top of the chat, actually, let me do this. I'm going to put into the chat room again, the ways that you can see the exhibition. I encourage you to look at the whole exhibition if you have not, shoot, I'm trying to multitask. This is what happens when you try to multitask and you're talking. Nope. Okay. So I'm going to put in the chat box when I'm done talking the websites where you can look at the Grace exhibition and you can learn more about these three wonderful artists. And I want to just thank you all for being here. And we will have eventually, oh, there they are. I got it in there. Yay. Oh, thank you, Sanzi. That was you. Well done. Okay, so the information is in the chat box. And thank you all so much. And we are going to call it a wrap. And I'm going to stop recording.